Spain is one of the countries with the most problems of demographic aging in the world. To give you an idea, with the exception of the microstates, Spain is in the top 10 countries with the highest average age, 43.3 years, and at the same time, one of the 10 countries with the lowest fertility rate. In the case of Spain, barely 1.3 children are born for every woman in a fertile state, far below the generational replacement rate. Take a look at how the aging index in Spain has evolved, for example. Today, there are already 125 people over 64 for every 100 children under 16. The population pyramid is increasingly inverted. And take note, because this process is going to accelerate a lot over the next 2 decades. Why? Well, because 1958 and 1977, there was a huge explosion in the birth rate. Between these 2 years, coinciding with the economic takeoff of the country, almost 14 million children were born. 4.5 million more than in the years following, and 2.5 million more than in the previous 20 years. It is Spain's equivalent to the baby boomer generation, a generation that today is increasingly close to retirement age. Because of this, it is expected that by mid-century, by 2050, the percentage of the population over 65 years of age will increase from 19% to 30%. This means that in just 3 decades, the population over 65 will increase by more than 6 million people. And that is as long as the average life expectancy does not improve faster than expected, despite all the medical and technological advances. A development that would obviously be extraordinary news. The problem is that, apart from being good news, this also means a lot of challenges for countries with aging populations like Spain, especially if we are talking about pensions, and especially if we are dealing with public systems. Because, my friends, the pension system in Spain is essentially a public pay-as-you-go system. That is, the workers of the present pay the pensions of their current retirees while waiting for the workers of the future to do the same for them. But, of course, if there are more and more retirees and fewer bodies in the working age population, Houston, we have a serious problem. And this is precisely what explains why more and more voices are warning of a possible collapse in the pension system, at least the system as we know it, over the next 2 or 3 decades. Now, having said that, the question is, why should I care? Well, because Spain is an economy within the Eurozone, and we're talking about a country of almost 47 million inhabitants, with a GDP of approximately $1.4 trillion, more or less 11% of the entire Eurozone GDP. You see, my friends, Spain is a country with many problems. A chronic deficit in the public accounts, a huge debt, and very little job creation. Well, if we add to all this the demographic aging and the possible collapse of pensions, what we find is nothing short of a ticking time bomb. If things don't change drastically, Spain, in the same way as Italy did, could leave the crisis in Greece looking like a comedy routine. What we're saying is that a financial collapse in Spain could drag down the entire Eurozone with it. In Spain, the data seems clear. It is urgent, necessary, pressing. The implementation of deep reforms to make the system viable simply cannot be postponed. So, where exactly are we? What financial problems is Spain facing? Are the pension system and public finances really in danger of collapse? These are the questions we intend to answer in this new collaborations with our friends at Value School. Check it out.
A discouraging picture.
You see, my friends, in Spain there are problems that are beginning to be very disturbing. For example, using data from Social Security and the National Statistics Institute, this 3rd quarter would give a good economic approximation of the state of the country. At the end of the 3rd quarter of 2020, some 19 million people were working in Spain, of which approximately 3.3 million were in the public sector. On the other hand, the state has to handle the payment of 9.7 million pensions and almost 3 million benefits for the unemployed. That is, while in the private sector there are slightly less than 16 million people with a job, including, of course, temporary or part-time jobs, the public administration has a commitment of more than 15 million payments between payrolls, pensions, and unemployment benefits. A ratio that, as you can see, is dangerously close to 1-on-1. One worker in the private sector for every check promised by the public sector. A level that, what can I say, doesn't exactly look very encouraging. Well, Pay attention, because everything points to the fact that things could get quite a bit worse over the next few years. In this video, we are going to focus specifically on everyone's main concern: pensions, which are by far the largest item of public expenditure in Spain. Their weight in the public budget is constantly growing, to the point that the central state is increasingly a payer of pensions. On the one hand, an increasing number of people are opting to retire from working life as soon as they hit 60. And on the other hand, new retirees are drawing higher pensions than those of pensioners who have recently passed away. This is why, since the year 2000, total spending on pensions has increased by approximately 160%. Today, already 1 out of 3 euros of all public spending goes to pay for pensions. But that is not all. As if these problems were not big enough, the public pension system in Spain is among the most generous in the entire OECD. To give you an idea, in net terms, the public pension at the time of retirement represents 83% of an individual's last salary. By comparison, the OECD average is 58.6%. In other words, public pensions in Spain are more generous than those of countries like Germany, Sweden, Norway, or Denmark. The fact is that, as we mentioned before, in Spain, the pension system is essentially a public pay-as-you-go system. People who are working pay the pensions of those who are already retired. The big problem with that is that, as you have seen, for several years now, the numbers haven't balanced, neither above nor below, neither on one side nor on the other. In 2019, the Spanish pension system had a deficit of about 17 billion euros. By 2020, with the coronavirus to deal with, this shortfall will increase to about 45 billion euros. That is, despite making some of the highest social contributions in the world, Spanish workers today are no longer able to finance all the pensions being paid. And this situation only promises to get much worse. Listen up, because this real horror story could turn into a total nightmare for the euro.
A future tinged with doubt.
Okay, so things are already looking bad, but it looks like they're about to get a lot worse. As we've already said, Spain is one of the countries most affected by demographic aging in the world, and that is something that will have consequences. By the middle of the century, it is expected, and this is important, that the dependency rate, that is to say, the percentage of people over 66 years of age in relation to those of working age, will be around 60%. In other words, if today there are 3.3 people of working age for every person over 65, in 2050, this figure will be less than 1.8. But of course, not everyone who is of working age will have a job. There will be students, the unemployed, the disabled, and people who simply choose not to work. For example, according to Eurostat data, the employment rate amongst people aged 20 to 65, i.e. the percentage of people in that age range who were working for the year 2019, was above 80% in countries such as Germany, the Netherlands, and Sweden, but only 68% in Spain. And take note, because this is not something temporary. In the last century, this rate has never been higher than 70%. So if we take this into account, even if things improve, we could find ourselves in 2050 with a ratio of 1 to 1.2 workers to every pensioner. And to top it off, productivity levels in Spain are not exactly NASA grade either. You see, as we approach the year 2050, the burden of pensions on each worker is going to be even greater. And remember that the system is already in the red. And then, of course, to all this spending, we also have to add the payroll of public employees, unemployment benefits, subsidies of all kinds, and potentially much higher healthcare spending. Because demographic aging does not only translate into more pensions, but also into higher health and dependency costs. And the question we need to ask is, where will all the money necessary to meet those commitments come from? Will Spain really be able to pay 15 million pensions? Please note that these are not minor questions. International bodies such as the OECD, the International Monetary Fund, and the European Commission have been warning about the threat of Spain's public accounts for years. For example, in order for the pension system to remain unchanged, that is, assuming the current deficit and the current average pension, Spain would need the number of social security members, that is, workers paying into the system, to exceed 29 million. To give you an idea, that would mean increasing the workforce by more than 50%. And if we are talking exclusively about the private sector, then we are talking about an increase of more than 80%. All this in a context of demographic aging. It just seems like an impossible mission. And As we have already said, it is not only about the social security system. In the end, it is the state that pays, and in that respect, things are no better either. Spain will emerge from the SARS coronavirus 2 pandemic with a record level public debt, around 120% of GDP, a chronic public deficit, high unemployment, and a very weak business environment. Whichever way you look at it, the scenario doesn't look good. Spain needs urgent reforms, but its political class is not in favour of the task. On the contrary, there is not even an open debate on the pension system, even though it is clearly heading towards the abyss. For example, the strongest pension systems in the world have one common feature. They all have strong savings and capitalisation components. That is, they are not essentially based on the pay-as-you-go formula. However, in Spain, this is a kind of no-go zone for the political class. In fact, the system is not only essentially public and pay-as-you-go, but in recent years, some benefits that previously existed to encourage Spaniards to save for their future have now been eliminated. But of course, as we mentioned before, it is not only about Spain. A crisis as big as the collapse of the Spanish pension system could drag down the entire Eurozone. And then what? A new bailout? So now it's over to you. How do you see the future of pensions? What reforms do you think should be carried out? Leave your answer in the comments below. As always, we really hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. Don't forget to check out our friends too at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not my dulcet tones. Also, this channel is possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And, as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear even more of my lovely voice, you can join us at Reconsider Media. We have a podcast at reconsidermedia.com/podcast. See you there.